Fala, meus queridos, tudo bem com vocês? Vini Veiga por aqui e hoje o nosso primeiro convidado internacional do Conversas e Apostas aqui no canal da VB no YouTube. Estou falando com o Neel, que é do perfil My Better Life, que é um dos maiores perfis da internet que fala sobre apostas esportivas. É um cara que está no mercado há muitos anos, já escreveu para a Pinnacle, já fez vários artigos sensacionais, especialista na Eurocopa, Copa América e em vários mercados de futebol. Então a gente vai conversar com ele aqui hoje e trazer para vocês uma perspectiva diferente, profissional e totalmente analítica, aprofundada sobre apostas esportivas e também falar sobre a nossa indústria como um geral, que a gente passa por um processo de regulamentação, a gente passa por períodos novos no Brasil e no mundo também sobre apostas. Então a gente vai conversar aqui com o Neel em inglês, vai estar legendado aqui embaixo para vocês, tá? E sentem-se livre de fazer comentários, perguntas e etc. junto ao Neel aqui nos comentários, tá bem, pessoal? Estou gravando essa conversa no dia 23 de maio, tá? Então é isso. Vamos lá para esse papo que vai ser muito legal, beleza? Neel, thank you very much for being here with us. I know that you have a very busy schedule, so for you to take a moment of your day to talk to us means a lot. So thank you very much for being here.
No, thank you, Vinny. Thank you for inviting me on. And my Portuguese is very limited, so I hope there were nice things you were saying there because I wouldn't know. But yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Amazing, amazing. So Neel, make a little Wikipedia about yourself for everybody who don't know yet about your work. So a little bit about your background and your betting life as a general.
Yeah, sure. So I'm grew up in London in the UK. I had a former life. I used to be a teacher, and then for one reason or another, and because of COVID, I had a daughter who was on the way, and betting was kind of like a hobby for me. Like I started maybe doing it like more seriously about 5 or 6 years ago, and then found a few strategies that were working quite nicely, making a little bit of profit. And then I thought to myself, look, it would be nice to work for myself. Let's give it a go, give myself 1 year to, just see if I can survive. And yeah, it's kind of snowballed from there. So I did some work with a few companies, including TradeMate. They kind of documented the start of my professional journey. I don't like kind of always saying, professional better. It's, anyone can kind of use that label, but in between then just had a few stints working in the industry, so working for the enemy, for the bookie, and also doing some work on the syndicate side as well. So I've kind of done a range of things. Obviously at the moment, I'm again kind of betting day to day, but for the Euros and Copa America, it's kind of what I enjoy. It's a good excuse to to tell my wife I'm working for a month. I'm able to watch all the football, but of course, and this is where I really try to put my focus. I think there's a good edge there, and so. Yeah, it's something I really enjoy. So that's me at the moment, just kind of surviving, just trying to get by, trying to outwit bookies every day. That's what I'm up to.
Amazing, Neel. And you talked about working with the enemy, let's say that, with the booking. And I was reading about some of your articles on Pinnacle, and you wrote some fantastic articles back then in 2021, 22. And some in particular caught my eye more about the gender difference in betting behavior that you wrote in 2022 on Pinnacle blog, no? And this is an amazing article because it's simple, but
That's very kind. Thank you.
very profound and very precising. So talk us a little bit more about the gender profile betting between men and women and how they are different when it becomes to practice. So when we talk about, well, the men bet on this and the woman bet on that, right? There is a clearly difference between two, right?
Yeah, it's a really interesting difference. I will say there is one caveat with the data is I think if any of your listeners who have kind of had their accounts closed and are making new ones, that there's a lot of female accounts, let's say, that are actually being used by male bettors. So I think that distorts the data a bit, but I think it still kind of holds true a lot of what's there. So to kind of summarize the article, what a lot of data in the US and a few other countries looked at was the losses. Generally, female gamblers will lose less, are kind of more risk averse, and it suggests they're able to actually handle their bankroll better. So even though as a proportion, female bettors are a kind of smaller pool, generally when it comes to sports betting, the women who are actually betting on sports, the average woman would generally loses less than the average man. And it's something I've observed in groups that I'm in, and generally the women who are in the groups are very smart about what they're doing, very conscientious, and I think what maybe one easy explanation is that generally women aren't as interested in sports as men. For example, they're not as passionate sports fan as a whole, so they treat sports betting as an investment, first and foremost. So they will be more likely to invest in trading software, betting software, look at data in a less biased, impartial way. So that's one combination. But I guess we see in the in the gambling sector, in the betting sector, overwhelmingly it's men. I suppose with your audience, do you have the demographics, for example? What percentage would you say are men of a certain age, or how many would be women?
90% men, 90%, 92, 93. So here in Brazil is also like this. And here, women go more to the casinos. So they are playing more casinos than men, right?
Yeah, and this is the interesting thing, because actually, we all know, unless you have bonuses, the casino games are kind of negative EV. You're going to lose money over time. Something that's quite popular here in the UK, I don't know if it's popular in Brazil, is bingo.
Yeah.
So there's not so many anymore, but there's big halls where you can go on a Friday night and play your bingo. Even some of my mum's friends, one of my mum's friends, she goes there with her friends every week, and I've been trying to say to her, look, get me some
It's a
bookie
social
accounts,
thing,
please. right? Yeah, and I think that's it. It's a social thing, and it's good fun. So they kind of see it as an expense. But it's the worst EV game you can play, bingo. So I can't bring myself to play it. So there is kind of a contradiction in a way that actually, you see how, let's say, the bingo casino sites there are targeted more towards women. The color schemes they use, the graphics, there's specific sites that have ladies in the title, so there is that element as well. But I think maybe that's where we make the distinction. So the women who actually bet on sports as a whole, if you compare their average to a male average, are generally smarter bettors. There might be evidence contradicting this. This is kind of from the data at the time. I think now you have so many more gambling markets opening up. I know, of course, in Brazil, things are really growing. In America, it's kind of spread across so many states. So it'll be interesting to see in 5-10 years time, what the data shows.
Yeah. And we will talk about Euro and Copa America and football betting, but for our start, we will talk a little bit about the gambling industry as a general. So Neel, you say that the Brazilian market is growing a little bit, and how the UK market sees the Brazilian market? It's a growing thing, really, or is it not? It's good for the gambling industry or not? How do you see the Brazilian market here today as a general?
I think, I mean, I wouldn't say I kind of have my finger on the pulse of everything, but from, for example, there was a gaming conference in London a few months ago, and I looked through the panels. I didn't actually attend, but I looked through a lot of the panels, and discussions were about the gaming market in Brazil and regulation there, and what it means for operators. A lot of talks in I suppose Latin America in general, but quite focused on Brazil. I see third party companies, who provide odds, who are, signing contracts with Brazilian bookmakers. There seems to be, a lot of growth, a lot of interest. I think the maybe the scene in the UK is quite insular. We're it kind of focused on what's happening in the UK. Some companies are kind of looking outwards, but whereas, let's say, in Brazil, in America, even in Africa, there's a lot of growth. Whereas it's the opposite here. So, companies are making layoffs. Having to fire people. Revenues are falling. Companies are getting fined. There's a very big push from the government to to have more regulation, to have stricter, safer gambling laws, to the point where it's people who just kind of even bet for fun are finding it very frustrating. So you will need to send lots of documents to prove who you are, show your income. So there's a lot of concerns about privacy, how much information that bookmakers are able to collect on you, and general sort of betting limits. That it's getting harder for a lot of people who've been betting for a long time, just to put a reasonable bet. And restrictions are getting faster, and I think this is a combination of how a lot of the bookmakers in the UK have become part of, let's say, bigger groups. They have a corporate board who, again, look at their profit margin a different way, and it was all kind of combined with, let's say, the way they used to compile odds, and maybe you could have this kind of a battle with some of your bigger punters. The risk tolerance for that is kind of far lower. So there's, I think, a combination of things which is, it's quite frustrating for UK punters. I think it's probably quite a bad time, kind of the polar opposite of where let's say Brazil is going, and the market is growing, and I'm sure a lot of the bookies there are giving good offers, and trying to sign up and acquire customers. Whereas it's let's say where the UK is now compared to 10 years ago, it's a very different place.
And tracing a parallel, when you started 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, it's a much more globalized market, right? We have so
Absolutely.
many countries to go. We have so many continents to bet on, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the growth is incredible. It just kind of shows that as human beings, we need something to gamble on. It's it's kind of being rolled out everywhere. So
It's a
even I
natural
used
thing, right?
absolutely. So I used to live in Qatar. So obviously it's a Muslim country, but this is where I actually started, my sort of professional journey. I still had links to the UK. It wasn't technically illegal to bet there, but obviously you needed to have, let's say, resources from elsewhere, VPNs, etc. But even there they have camel racing, and so all the local Qatari guys, they'll bet on the camels, between each other, So it's everywhere. So it's just kind of our innate kind of need to do it.
And the networking as well, because you are a British guy talking to a Brazilian guy, how this could be imaginable 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. So I also think that the big fairs, we have the Ice London, we have others. So it's a place where you can go and meet new people. And Vegas, there will be a Bet Bash this year with Spanky and other guys who will be there. So, as a general, beyond the betting market, we also have this huge globalized community where we can talk to everybody a little bit, right?
Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, so in my contacts list, of course, yourself. There's people from Portugal, Australia, America, from China, all over the world. I've had kind of conversations with. We're all trying to do the same thing, and yeah, you're absolutely right. The globalization of ideas, around betting. It's really nice to see, yeah, and it's great to just see different perspectives. I mean, I learn a lot because I assume maybe I'm quite lucky in the UK that we have a lot of choice of bookmakers and availability of different markets, whereas for other people I know in my groups they find it a little bit difficult. But I hope that's that will kind of expand and grow over the years.
Okay, amazing. So let's talk a little bit about the Copa America that will happen. And we, as a Brazilian, we always think that Brazil will win. It's a normal thing, even though Argentina is the current World Cup champion. But we have this arrogance, let's say that Brazil is always the best team. So let's talk about this and this competition. How is good for you to work? Why Copa America? Why do you see as a competition that you can make money from?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, in general, I would say it's tournaments, big tournaments themselves. There's kind of inherent edges in those markets. So the way bookmakers will tend to price things, they can be a little bit lazy. The algorithms they use will look at things which I think are more accurate for league football domestic competitions. Copa America this year will be an interesting competition. So yeah, of course we all know Argentina going in as strong favourites, Brazil just behind them. It'd be interesting to see what the odds are in Brazil, because in England, every time England are in a tournament, the odds are always really short for them. There's no real value in taking that bet. I why this is a particularly interesting tournament, I would say that probably of all the international tournaments, so I covered the African nations and the Asian Cup in January. Previously I've done the World Cup and the Euro, so it's a first time for me to do the Copa America. I would say it's probably the toughest competition to read, at least on the liquid markets. One of the reasons is because the South American teams generally will play each other more often than the European teams. The qualifying, they play each other in this kind of huge league. In Europe, you have a lot of weak teams that players are up against. So there's only so much you can kind of read into the statistics, where I think actually they give a better kind of accurate picture of where things are, in South America. But then, maybe it's just a cliche or kind of a bias as Europeans we have, but the kind of assumption is that, in Brazil and all the South American countries can kind of hire and fire managers quite quickly. They don't survive as long as they do in Europe. So even Brazil are a really interesting case, I think, because now they have a relatively new manager. The last manager they had, I believe, was Dorival, yeah, was also the managing his club as well, that they won the Libertadores. Trying to combine that, but with a very different style. I think an interesting podcast I was listening to a few days ago. Basically saying you've got players playing in England, across Europe, who are kind of playing a very different kind of football, and trying to bring them back into this, international team environment, and a completely different style. You only have a few weeks to work with them. It was always going to be very difficult, but it looks like results have picked up, and they had a good result against England, against Spain. I'm looking forward to seeing Endrick. I think he's one of my tips, I think, to be a goal scorer. I mean, it'd be interesting to see what Brazilians think about that, if he's going to get starts. I kind of see him as you go into all these tournaments, and just as a neutral, you're always excited to see this kind of a young star kind of make their mark. But I think it's quite open. One of the things I looked at was the USA. It's obviously on their home turf, on home soil. maybe 10 years, 20 years ago, you'd be laughing at me for saying that, they could potentially win this. But if you look at their draw, and they avoid Argentina on their side of the draw, I think, Uruguay, Colombia, Brazil, those are their likely opponents on the way to the final. And I think they all have, weak points, in their team. I think there's, other than Argentina, there's no real outstanding kind of team that's well balanced across all areas. Something I looked at was home advantage as well. So, in the Copa America, going back, I think it goes back a long time, but let's say going back to I think, the 1939, 1940, when there were more than 4 teams. So, you had to actually do something to be a semi-finalist. But I think 29 of those editions, 24 of those 29 times, the host has at least made the semi-final. And I think, more than 10 occasions have actually, won the tournament, been a runner-up at least 4 or 5 times. So generally the trend is, home advantage is a very strong factor. And even that's going back the last 4 editions as well. That generally, the home team will have a strong run. So, that's one of my rationales for America. Also, I think Colombia, at least over here, in the coverage that's been here, not really being talked about. They're kind of going under the radar. So that's, something I look at when I look at tournaments is kind of teams like that, not, kind of ignoring the top of the market. When you're looking at, especially the outright odds, the margin that's applied to them, they're generally always going to be quite short, for good reason. They are the favorites, but, for interest, especially if you can get an each way bet, if you look through the history of big tournaments, there will always be a team, usually be a team at, double-digit odds that will at least get to the semi-finals. There are always going to be surprises. So it's trying to narrow down your focus to look at that. Like me personally, I would love to see Uruguay because I'm a big Bielsa fan. But at the same time, the reason I love him is because he's so unpredictable. I wouldn't want to put money on them for that reason. I think they've got a really good chance. They're third favorites for a reason, but that's where I would be wary. But someone like Colombia, I think they're on a 17-game unbeaten run. I think they beat Germany. I think they beat Brazil.
They beat Brazil, yes.
And Spain as well, I believe. So that's okay. If a few of those games are friendlies, but at the same time, that shows that they're a very strong side. And I think it depends again where some of the games are being played. It will be quite hot in some of the venues, but I'm expecting this to not necessarily be a high scoring tournament. So when the margins are that small, I think they have a great chance. So that's something I would look at. The difference with, I guess, the Copa America, because I'm covering Copa America and the Euros, is in terms of the availability of markets. So it's quite interesting to see. For example, you'll have markets in the Euros for individual team top goal scorers. So who's going to be Brazil's top scorer, who's going to be Argentina's top scorer, which you don't really have those markets here at the moment. The best player of the tournament, for example, or the best young player, these kind of side markets, because that's where you can definitely get a big edge. But they don't seem to be there yet. So hopefully that they will kind of have those. Are those kind of available in Brazil at the moment? Like there's a kind of wide range of things. Or?
Yes. So let's dive a little bit more in about the Copa America, about the competition itself. That it's a sharp competition. We have this concept about being a sharp competition, about being a competition that it's hard to find value on, because we always see the biggest competitions on earth as a more difficult competition to find value, because there is a lot of money on it, because there is a lot of liquidity on the matches. So how do you see that, and how do you take an advantage of being a big liquidity market, you know, it's not so easy to find value as we look as, I don't know, the third division of Romania, as the third division of Bulgaria. But when we look at Brazil against Colombia, it's a match that Pinnacle will accept 100,000 euros on the Brazilian win or something like that, you know. So my question is, Neel, when you see this competition, there is a big liquidity. How do you manage that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of the things you can do is try to look ahead. So obviously, with a tournament like the Copa, with the Euros, you know, you have a group phase, you have the 3 games. The lines will come out for the games, you know, generally, let's say a week or so in advance. Maybe as an example, so in the World Cup, I think it was. I can't actually remember. I think Japan beat Spain and maybe South Korea beat Germany, and they were the last games in the group, and the odds were quite high, you know, here with Ladbrokes, but they were out, you know, more than a week before. So, you know, looking at that, thinking actually, if you look at the permutations in the group, what might happen on the final game, for example, which teams don't have anything to play for, which teams are, you know, desperate to win. You know, you can kind of get some value looking ahead and trying to kind of predict where the momentum is going. So, for example, in the World Cup, you know, again, Argentina lost their first game. Everyone was panicking.
Against Saudi Arabia, yeah.
Yeah, Argentina's price drifted. But if you watch the game, you know, they had, you know, 1,000 shots, you know, to Saudis, a few shots on goal. 9 times out of 10, they would have ended up winning that game, scoring, you know, a goal, at least equalizing. So, you know, you could see, if you were just kind of a you know, a football fan, a follower of you know, of football, that it wasn't really a huge concern. It was a shock, but actually, you know, the overreaction was too big. So that's like, for example, that's where I might look. You know, if, for example, Brazil, I don't know what's their first game. If they lose, let's say, for example, they lose their first game in the group,
I will look.
yeah, there'll be an overreaction. But again, if you're kind of looking at those markets, you think this is the time to back them, or, you know, same with Argentina. You know, this is the time to actually look where they're at. The other thing is handicap markets. So, you know, one of the things that I'm probably going to be doing most games is, like, let's say with in Paraguay's group, you know, I think actually they can, you know, keep games relatively close. Again, if you kind of the feeling that it's going to be a low scoring game, generally the handicaps, you know, would be a way to kind of to factor that in. I think teams tend to kind of feel their way into the competition. They don't kind of go 100 miles an hour in the first game. They'll again, the kind of the weaker sides, I think, at least from what I can observe, like especially the quality gap with the weaker teams in CONMEBOL. I think, like, let's say someone like, well, maybe not this Bolivia, but, you know, for example, teams like Bolivia, but even like teams like Peru, you know, Ecuador have actually, you know, had, you know, good generations of players, and actually the gap is smaller between them and the top nations, and you know, the CONCACAF teams that are coming in as well. You know, I think USA and Mexico are quite competitive, and even this Canadian team is probably the best generation they've had. So I think international football, if you look at it as a trend, you know, generally the kind of gaps, you don't see many kind of big scores, you know, like 6-7 nils, you know, in these competitions anymore that maybe you used to. I think kind of targeting those kind of handicaps on the underdogs, that's something I would definitely look at as well.
So if Brazil loses to Costa Rica in the first match, it's against Costa Rica, the odds
could happen, yeah,
will go through the roof for Brazil to be the champion. So it will be an opportunity, as you said, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, even if they, let's say, scrape a draw against Costa Rica, then at least you'll get, you know, kind of more generous odds. So that, I think that's it. It's
the market tends to reacted the first results, right? They overreacted.
Absolutely. The other thing I would say is matchups. So I think maybe where a lot of like bettors that are starting out, they'll look at things, they'll look at statistics, they'll look at the data, the percentages, but actually they won't be looking at how does this team perform against this team. Not just, let's say head-to-heads, but for example, again, I have a few, like, let's say, Uruguayan friends who are like, they're kind of scared of Colombia. They would rather play Brazil than Colombia, for example, because they just see the matchup as more difficult. So I think, particular teams will have that. And this is what I look at when I look at the props on an individual game basis. Again, how many shots a player might have, how many tackles, how the flow of the game is going to happen, if they're going to dominate the passing. Not necessarily whether they'll win the game, but these kind of markets tend to be a little bit more predictable. The pricing of them, because there's so much margin in the market, the bookmaker, generally can be a bit sloppy with these. So there's always opportunities there, to kind of pick those off. So definitely, I think matchups are important. Knowing the kind of team. Again, some of the squads there, maybe they're more unpredictable in terms of what the starting lineup is going to be. But again, with some of those, if you can kind of predict the kind of tactics, if the kind of the more settled teams, then you'll have a kind of stronger, advantage.
Amazing, Neel. Amazing content. And so when there is much more than just who will win the match in this big competition. So as you said, there is a big prop market that you can go on. So you have to be a little bit clever to not go only on the big markets. You can find a lot of things on the smaller markets, on the prop markets, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that's that would say, that's my sort of bigger edge.
Yes.
It's much tougher to beat the main liquid lines. It's still possible, but you can be a little bit more creative. But yeah, where you want to be looking again is, again, some of these statistic-based markets, the corners and cards or individual kind of player lines. Looking at this in play as well. So kind of seeing where the momentum in the match is going. Something I like to do is, again, kind of betting in play on corners. Sometimes on cards, but mainly on corners, as that generally the algorithms kind of go overreact or kind of go a bit haywire in the last 10-15 minutes. It's let's say in England there's a kind of inevitability sometimes. What's going to happen with England. We might be winning, and then we concede an equalizer, and then you just know what's coming, and we're just going to stay in our box. We're going to concede territory. That's the kind of momentum of the game. So again, I'm sure like having that familiarity of the teams is where it is an advantage to look at those side markets. So I think the bigger the betting menu, obviously the more kind of terrible value there is there. But if you're selective and you target specific things. Of course, if the bookmaker is offering that many markets, they're not, really spending that much time pricing them beyond the tissue that they get, making a few tweaks here or there, and being fast to information. So, if there's rumors of a player being injured, a key player for a team, and you think maybe it's 50-50, that's an opportunity, to take a gamble, to back that.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think like, and then other information. So one example is, one of the tips I sent for the Euros, the best player of the tournament was Tony Kroos. And then he announced his retirement. I didn't actually know that was happening. I thought it might be a rumor, but he announced his retirement from Real Madrid, a few days later, and his price, halved from 33 to 1 to, like 16 to 1. On the basis of that announcement, and people kind of piling in. So I guess it's like anything. I'm sure, I guess is say the same thing. Just the earlier you are, the faster you are to react to information that might affect the prices. The better it's going to be.
So the same thing applies to the Eurocopa, to the Euros, because as you said, you have a lot of prop markets that the bookmaker will open, like as the Tony Kroos market that you just said, like you pick up on the 33 to 1, now it's 60 to 1. So we have now the Euros on Germany for this year. But on the last competition, we had on different venues, we had matches on a lot of places, on a lot of countries. How this affected your job or not?
It's a really good question. The last Euros, there were lots of different factors going into that. So I spent a lot of time, looking at the wall charts and the posters, trying to figure out, who's playing where. Trying to go on like Google Maps, finding out how how far is it for one plane to go from, for example, I think Belgium had a kind of really awkward schedule. I think they played, I think maybe one game in Hungary, 3 different countries. So they had quite an awkward time of traveling, whereas England pretty much played every single game at home. Italy played, I think, all but one of their games. So the final at home. So there was a big factor of home advantage. And I think also with teams maybe not being so settled, normally you have like a base, you're in that kind of one place, the lack of travel time. I think it's one of the factors for the World Cup why I think it was such a great World Cup, because all the teams were kind of Qatar, Doha is a very small place. They were kind of settled in one place. So these kind of things do make a difference with players. They're finely tuned athletes, but again, kind of traveling around, going to different places, it's a nuisance in a game with small margins. That's something to be considered if they have delays, or they're kind of again kind of thrown off by these kind of factors. So this time around, that's not so much a factor. Germany have the home advantage, but actually, I mean, a stat that surprised me is, or maybe I can see if you can guess, like when is the last time a host nation won the Euros?
Oh, I don't know. When was the last time?
So 1984.
1984. Oh my God.
Yeah, the year
40
I was
years
born.
ago.
So 40 years. So I mean, a lot of countries have got to the final since then. Had good runs, but actually, a host nation hasn't won it in all that time.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, 7 tournaments, I believe, since then. So it can make a difference, but again, it's looking at these kind of statistics. I think something with the tournament, it's really just kind of doing some of the research, looking at kind of interesting historical angles. Normally, I'm not a fan of head-to-heads, but something like that I think is relevant, and it's a way to look at the tournament. And it's a very open tournament again. So again, I mean, England are top of the betting. I don't agree that we should be, but I think we are on paper one of the favorites. I would still pick France ahead of them. But you've got again some kind of very open teams there. Something I looked at for the last Euros. I'm kind of happy that I won the bet, but it was at the expense of England. So I picked Italy before the tournament. So the final was quite stressful for me.
I saw that on your blog. I saw that on your blog that you picked Italy.
Yeah, my heart wanted England, but my bank balance needed Italy. So but one of the rationales that I chose them was, they had a, I think 26, 27 game unbeaten run going into the Euros. And this is what I like, is looking at these teams that no one is really talking about, and going under the radar, because if no one's really talking about them, the bookies also are underestimating their potential chances and ability, and you can certainly find something interesting there. And it's again sort of playing the numbers. So I think this is an exciting tournament. It'll be very interesting. There's this group of death, the so-called group of death, Italy, Spain, Croatia, and Albania. I think will be a very interesting one to observe, and it's a difficult one to call. I like Germany to go far. I think German teams have done well this year. The team itself is improving, and again, they're kind of being talked about a little bit more, but not quite at that level. Yeah.
But where is the edge on this competition? Where is the edge for you?
So yeah, the main edge is, I would say, again, kind of looking away from the liquid market. Even the winner market is going to be tough this time. But let's say goal scorers.
Goal scorers.
So one big difference is, with the Copa America, there's no each way market on the goal scorers. So, for example, with the Euros, I could put a bet on one player. So, for example, Romelu Lukaku, at his odds, you get 1/4 of the odds if he's in the top 4 or top 5 in the tournament. And I think that's a nice market to look at, where again you have a lot of players that have big odds. They might not get the top prize, but you're still getting a lot of value on the place. Because if you look back on previous tournaments, usually, maybe 3 goals is enough to kind of land you in those places at most tournaments. So you've got a good range of players there, who can actually be consistent. The team goal scorer markets as well, I think, are quite lazily priced. Not that many bookmakers have gone up with them yet. But again, I think the way that the bookmakers have priced them based on records, or let's say transfer market values, but not necessarily looking at the expected XG of those players, looking at their club form. And I think this is kind of universal, goes to the Copa America as well. Someone like Darwin Nunez, Liverpool fans, just he drives them mad. But then under Bielsa, he's a different player. So there's a lot of players like that, where you think that they will actually perform at a high level for their country, or they have a good record at tournaments. Someone like Alvaro Morata, who again, people will criticize. People don't see him as this good finisher, but if you actually look at statistics, if you look at what he's done for Spain, what he's done in tournaments, there is definitely an edge there. Because I think some of the opinions in these markets, they're top heavy. So especially kind of looking at these kind of the top goal scorer, top assists, top team goal scorers, they're very compressed at the top. So if you just go slightly further down the list, there will always be a few players, where actually the odds are more generous than they should be, and just playing those numbers.
And the soft books are always more slow on adjusting those lines, right? When you talk about the prop market, the player market, when you have a top goal scorer, and always there is a more edge on the soft books, right? On those kind of markets, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of those markets, they just wouldn't exist on the agents, but those markets in particular, there's always an edge. I think, again, because the margin that's already added in there is some kind of cover. It doesn't take a huge amount, let's say, to move the prices. Maybe a few tipping groups, a few hundred people who are kind of moving the line in that way. But even then, that creates opportunities, because with the way the market moves around, some players will drift back into range closer to the tournament. So I've been giving tips now, but I'm expecting, let's say, a week before the tournament, we watch the friendlies. There could be players getting injured. Some teams are going to be making some tactical changes. Players might be moving, into slightly different positions. So, there's a lot, for most of the big teams, especially I think with the Euros, there aren't many teams, at least the top teams, who are kind of playing with like a dedicated striker, like a real number 9. So actually that opens up a lot of options for
Spain as the example. Spain, right?
Yeah, I guess Spain have Morata, but actually it's, let's say Ferran Torres or Yamal, like they've got a great chance of getting in the action. A team like Scotland, for example, if you were to look at their goal scorers, actually, McTominay would be quite good value to be their goal scorer. He doesn't do that role for Man United, but for Scotland, again, he kind of pushes forward. He's got more aggressive in that sense. For Ukraine, for example, Zinchenko, if you look at the roles that some of these players play for their national team, he kind of is pushed quite far into midfield for the Ukraine, kind of mixes up midfield and in defense for for Arsenal, and is kind of inconsistent. So this is where, you know, maybe bookies are, you know, being a little actually Mudryk as well would be an example of Ukraine. Not done so much for Chelsea, but I think, you know, Bet Victor had him as it was 16-1 at one point for top Ukraine scorer. It's down to like 10-1, but I still think that that's too generous. I think I guess the approach for tournaments is maybe quite different to, let's say, other things that I bet on. So, you know, when I bet on horses and golf, where there is a calculation of EV, you know, there's a kind of quite accurate figure in mind, whereas this is kind of, you know, I hate to say it, but more kind of feel and intuition about, you know, these kind of gaps, because I think it's an unknown. A lot of it is an unknown for the bookmaker, and an unknown for the punter. There is less certainty. So, you know, again, backing up, you know, what you're seeing, what the data is telling you with this kind of historic record is the way to do it.
And where we can find your tips, you are selling the package tips for the Euros, right, on your website. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So you can find me on Twitter, you know, at mybettor, MYBETTOR. LIFE, and then I can give you the link as well. So maybe you can
we'll put here. Yes, we'll put here.
In the
on the description. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll just say, so the last 5 tournaments have all been kind of profitable. You can see on the link, you know, the records from those tournaments. It's a mix.
I'm buying it.
So that's kind of what I'm planning to do. It's predominantly will be Euros focused, because, you know, most of the audience will be from, let's say, the UK, but, you know, I will be quite active on the Copa America. It depends what kind of lines will be coming out here in the UK, and obviously because of time difference, I think I'm able to catch the first kickoffs, but you know, I'm going to struggle to be awake for the later games in the evening. But yeah, you know, any questions, you know, feel free to ask me. I'm posting up some free content as well on Twitter and a few other channels. So, you know, there'll be some kind of free bets, you know, coming away with all the analysis and rationale too.
Amazing. Neel, amazing content. I would like to be here talking to you all day, but I know that it's not possible. But amazing content. It's been fantastic to having you here. And I always ask my guests to recommend us a book about what you find more interesting at the moment. Can be about sports betting or not. I mean, this is your choice, right? But recommend us a good book now for us to read. I think it's going to be good to follow your recommendation about it.
Well, it's a tricky question. So you would say, well, something related to sports betting. I'm just looking at my bookshelf here. Yes. Let me see if I can find the book here. Yeah, actually, it is sports betting related. I am reading another book, which is I can briefly mention, which has nothing to do with sports betting, but it's called Era of Darkness. I got a new copy of it because I've read it on Kindle, which is about, which maybe your Brazilian audience will find interesting, with the colonial history of the Portuguese. So that was about what the British did in India, and, you know, some of the history that, you know, doesn't get taught here, you know, in terms of the wealth that they took. But that's an interesting kind of, you know, just side read. I struggle to get much time to read. But the other book is Hot Hand. This is really interesting in terms of how you look at statistics, and I wrote an article kind of based on this for Pinnacle about winning streaks. So, you know, if a team goes like 10 games in a row.
I was reading this earlier today, and I found out amazing this article also.
So it was really interesting, and actually it's very timely, because I bet on Leverkusen last night to win you know, the Europa League. If anyone isn't aware, they're on a 51 match unbeaten run. And I thought, you know, they were being offered close to, you know, it was like 1.94 at kickoff. I said, I have to take this price.
Yes.
and they lost, you know, they lost miserably. So it just goes to show you, you know, that I think the kind of bias we have when we see streaks, when we see patterns, when we see trends, especially if we're trying to be kind of sharp bettors, is to kind of resist the thinking that, you know, what has happened before will happen next, trying to isolate what you see in front of you, what the potential edges are, and kind of removing that. Because clearly, let's say the Leverkusen game is a great example, because Leverkusen's price kind of shortened, I think, to about, let's say, 1.85 on the exchanges, and then it drifted back out. I suspect, again, because syndicates, big money was kind of coming on the other side for Atalanta, so maybe they have their models kind of saying, actually, this is the kind of target range. This is, too big for Atalanta, and again, you saw that move. So yeah, I definitely recommend it. It's a great book. It's more focused on US sports, on, let's say, basketball, baseball, but a lot of it can be applied to any kind of sport. Yeah.
Yes. And this topic, it's amazing because the books often they tend to think that the normal will happen over the time, because Leverkusen is not meant to spend 15 games unbeaten. So
absolutely, yeah.
They always think, oh, next match they will come back to earth. Next match they will come back to earth. And if I bet a lot on baseball, it's my best sport for betting for myself. And we often see these types of streaks on bad teams. So we have like Oakland Athletics or the Colorado Rockies winning 7-8 games in a row, and the odds for them to winning more are always the same. It's like 2.80, 2.90, and they don't adjust as they should on the hot streak, because they always think, oh, this is a fluke. It will come back to earth, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two ways of looking at it, actually. If you think, let's say the results, I think if it's kind of well-deserved and that hot streak has kind of built that confidence, you would expect the price to be a bit different. You would expect them to have a little bit more of an advantage.
What is confidence, right? It's
absolutely, yeah. How do you quantify? How do you put a number on that?
Exactly.
But I think that's the kind of approach. Again, with the tournament betting, with betting in general, you can have a kind of top-down, bottom-up approach. You can have a feel for the numbers, but also what's missing. This kind of added context where it's difficult for the bookies to put an accurate price on there.
Yes.
And you have an opportunity to kind of put your own interpretation. That's where the knowledge is an advantage. Sometimes knowledge can be a hindrance and actually form some biases, but this is where it can definitely be a benefit.
Yes, like this team should not be winning. Why they're winning? Like they're bad. Like they are not supposed to win 10 in a row. They're not supposed to win 11 in a row, right?
Exactly. And how long is it going to carry on?
Yes, and this is why it's so amazing to bet to be a better, because the answer is not always on the math. Like there are some things that are still out there that we did not found the answers yet, like why this team is winning so much. So sometimes the stats don't show us that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many different factors. So without getting into too much trouble, but to give an insight, let's say, how syndicates might look at a game, where, let's say, the average gambler is not looking at it, and even the bookmakers aren't, to some extent. Like, are you looking at the weather conditions for this match? How is that going to impact the number of goals? Is it going to be more or less goals? If it's heavy rain, if it's light rain, if if it's like a really bad kind of chewed up pitch, like in the middle of Chile, like are you even watching? Like what's happening? Are there kind of holes in the pitch there? There was I think it was a new tournament they had, American and US teams, they kind of like a cup competition. I forget the name of it last year, but there was a Mexican team who again missed their flight. They had to sleep in the airport overnight, right? So just kind of on the benches, on the floor. They're not in great shape. Like if you're betting on the game, are you aware of things like that?
Yes.
are the bookies even aware of it? If you're fast enough, you can get there ahead of, of the actual bookmakers. So it's just factoring like all the kind of small margins. When you have a rating system, if you know how to kind of price a game on a tissue, and then adding your own kind of qualitative model to that, and how much importance you give it, and you can kind of get a feel for it. Some leagues, some games, it's kind of more important than others, but that again is one way you can kind of distinguish yourself from, let's say, the regular sports gambler, and actually really improve your edge.
Neel, amazing. Thank you very much for the conversation. I think that we covered all the topics about the Euros, about the Copa America, about the more analytical stuff that we talked about. So thank you very much. I know that this is not that it's not easy to find time to talk to guys like you, to legends like yourself. So this is it. And if you want to send a message, a final message to the viewers.
Yeah, just thank you very much for inviting me, Vinny. And no, I'm not a legend by any means. I'm just kind of just doing my thing, just trying to.
You are humble.
Living, I think.
You are humble.
No, I think it's something anyone can do. It's something I just kind of taught myself, and just you kind of ask people things, you pester them, until they respond to you. And there's a lot of really good people out there, in the betting space, who are happy to help. And like you mentioned, the kind of different things that you read, interesting articles out there. I've taken inspiration from a lot of people. So it's something any of you can do. So I so thank you to all your viewers, listeners. Really appreciate your time. I hope there's been something useful. I know sometimes I watch things and maybe I spend an hour listening to it, and maybe there's only a few minutes of like golden nuggets. So at least even if it's that, I know, I wish you guys well. Good luck to Brazil, but it's going to be tough. And yeah, my pleasure, Vinny. So really, really nice to be in the pod, and very thankful for the opportunity.
Amazing. And let's make money on Brazil to lose against Costa Rica. Let's hope that.
That's it. You'll get some good odds. Yeah.
So we can get good odds. I mean, this is all. I mean, always about. Everything is about this. Let's get good odds.
That's it. It's all about the numbers.
É isso, meus queridos. Conversa com o Neel encerrada. Então, deixe os seus comentários aqui e curtam, compartilhem. Vamos deixar essa conversa cada vez mais popular para a gente trazer conteúdos como esse. Obrigado, meus queridos, e até a próxima. Tchau, tchau.